Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Salesforce Ben LinkedIn Live collaboration, this time in partnership with GetAccept. So today we're going to explore the world of RevOps and how it can accelerate your sales cycle on Salesforce. So it's no secret that sales efficiency and productivity are top priorities for businesses everywhere. That's why today we're going to unpack some of the top challenges faced by revenue teams. We'll also be sharing trending solutions to tackle these challenges head on. So while we wait for everyone to join, let us know where you're logging in from today. We always love to see what a global audience we have attending. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. My name is Zaina Dar, and I'm the events content producer at Salesforce Ben, and I'll be your host for this event. I'm really excited to introduce you to Madison Simon, Tarek El-Gawabi from GetAccept, and Remy Morkan from Edit AI, who are here with us today to talk about how RevOps strategies can transform your sales processes and drive revenue growth. Madison, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Zaina. Hi, everyone. My name is Madison Simon. I work with Tarek at GetAccept as our Salesforce Alliance Manager. I've been with the company for about 5.5 years, and really thankful to work with product Tarek and the product team, and then our sales team as well, very closely.
Cool, thank you. And you, Tarek? Sure.
Yeah, I'm a senior product manager at GetAccept, and I'm a Canadian, but calling in from southern Sweden. And I've been at GetAccept for 3 years, and we've really been focused on digital sales rooms and how we can really bring that into the Salesforce environment and really help RevOps teams and others sell more. So excited for this event.
Thank you. And you, Remy?
Hey guys, I'm Remy. I'm Norwegian and based out of Norway. I'm currently the CEO of a small Norwegian tech startup called Edda, but before that I worked as the SVP of sales at a SaaS called Sales Screen. So I guess that's why I'm here today.
Nice. All right, thank you. So before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. So as this is a webinar, all lines are muted, but don't worry, we'll be having a Q&A at the end for you to ask our panelists any burning questions you may have. So feel free to submit the questions in the comments throughout the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded and will be available on our Salesforce Ben YouTube and LinkedIn channel, just in case you need to drop off or would like to share it with your colleagues. Okay, well, great. I'll hand it over to you guys to take us through the presentation, and I'll see you at the end for the Q&A.
Thanks, Zaina. Fantastic. So we have some slides here, although we'll be primarily discussing everything. So the agenda for today is looking at the state of RevOps so we can put into context what we mean when we say RevOps and Salesforce. Also, we will look at a few digital sales trends and the challenges that revenue operations leaders are facing today. And then we'll look at Salesforce and tying in different technical tricks and tips that can address some of these common challenges. And finally, Q&A at the end. So first here, I thought we could set the stage by really thinking about RevOps and what it means today. LinkedIn in 2023 and also 2024 is still seeing the rise of revenue operations roles. But I think in more recent years, what we're seeing is revenue operations as a function is expanding. It's not only the technical aspects of systems and processes, but also growth activities and collaborating with marketing more often, using AI tools, considering the external customer experience, and finally, using the ever-growing data sets that we have internally and that we're gathering externally. And so I'm curious to kick us off, Remy and both Tarek, if you could both share what does RevOps mean to you? How would you define RevOps from your experience?
I can go first. For me, RevOps is just execution power, right? It's somebody that's gonna help me make my dreams come true. And the RevOps I've worked with, it's always been somebody that's challenging me and my ideas, being able to connect my sales process, my ideas for that sales process with the technology, with Salesforce, to make that combination of process and Salesforce as effective as possible and letting sales reps sell, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for me, as a product manager, we always have to think of the end-to-end use case for our users and really think of their full journey. And I think for me, I connect with RevOps because you're trying to build that engine from when you first get a lead into actually converting that to revenue. And I always connect with roles where you need to break down silos. You need to actually create a process that works for the organization to actually scale that process so that you actually win the deals that you need to win in a way that makes sense and in a way that you can actually transfer to other people in the company. So RevOps is a very powerful role when done right. And it really connects a lot of different dots in an organization. And I think it's when it's done right, it's very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's not just about building the systems so that everything can function seamlessly, but also does it connect back to the end goal of selling and all of those customer-facing interactions, which is kind of the summary or the key takeaway that we'll focus on today, especially for Salesforce customers. The idea of caring about the customer experience is really popular because Salesforce talks about customer experience, customer journey, the whole life cycle, all of the pieces of the life cycle. And then we have RevOps, who have always been focused on internal efficiencies. But what we really want to look at today is where does this overlap and how can a RevOps leader or team think about defining RevOps excellence for their organization by considering both sides of the same coin. Anything anyone would like to add on this note?
Yeah, I think on this one, a lot of what we're seeing in the market is people are having a challenge of connecting what's happening in Salesforce and their internal process with what's actually happening with their buyers and their prospects. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the best RevOps teams are really focused on that full end-to-end journey. And you really have to connect what's going on with your buyer with what's happening in your Salesforce process and what's happening with your internal teams. And when RevOps teams do that and keep Salesforce at the center, that's where you can really start to achieve some pretty strong results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like what's the means to the end? Why are all of these efficiencies being created?
And I think it's always important to remember, the customer experience, the buyer, buying is hard. Buying a new B2B SaaS tool, there's so much competition, there's so much going on. You're trying to make their lives easier and connect that with your internal sales process.
Yep, definitely. And in order to utilize the most of Salesforce, one should definitely consider all of these different customer interactions. Salesforce has a lot to offer in that regard. And now we're curious, what is the number one revenue goal that the audience is focusing on this quarter or this year? We're going to get a little bit more narrow and discuss more of the technology side of RevOps now as it relates to Salesforce and look at ways that Salesforce can impact bottom line revenue. But let's hear what everyone's revenue goals or focuses are today. And it's okay if you don't want to put it in the chat. We have a few that we will share and focus on as well. So there's the Global Digital Sales Report recently that GetAccept released, which polled over 300 C-suite revenue leaders across multiple industries and regions. And so there are a series of trends that were highlighted in this report. I think Zaina may have the link to share in the chat for everyone who's curious. Today, we're going to look at 3 different trends and what leaders are focusing on this year in the world of RevOps. And the first trend here is that 79% of leaders expressed a shared goal to increase win rates. This one, I guess we could say it's a truism of sorts. We all know win rates and increasing win rates is important. And the way that this can happen is vast. There are many different ways to attack this challenge. And so on this topic, I'm curious, Remy, I know this particular goal was your number one objective when you were working at SalesScreen, and you actually managed to achieve the goal and double the win rate percentage. Could you share a little bit about how you found that this was a challenge, how you addressed the challenge, and some of your experience with this?
Yeah. So we went into 2023 with okay results in 2022. not better, not worse, right? And we just realized that we weren't succeeding in the enterprise segment, and that's where we needed to succeed. So we had a win rate of 13% in that segment, and we set a bold goal. We wanted to increase that win rate from 13 to 25%. So we started with the data, we need to improve this win rate. And then you start to kind of break things down. How do we get to that result? And for us, like, to succeed with enterprise in 2023 and in 2024, you need a truly defined sales process, right? Down in detail, not just theoretical, but practical. How do we actually do this? Does this actually work? Do we have proof that the things that we're trying to implement is actually working? We need to kind of break down that process again, down into concrete actions that each rep has to do to progress from one stage in Salesforce to the next. So what do you need to do to go from discovery to SQL, or SQL to the next stage, and so on? And then the most difficult thing is making sure that your reps follow that process. And that's what we went through, and we worked together with GetAccept with the digital sales rooms, which was kind of the breaking point for us, where we weren't able to just kind of do this together with the customer or together with the reps, but we kind of brought the customer into that process as well. And that's when we saw how our win rates just started slowly improving throughout the year.
And what was the specific challenge for the enterprise segment? Like, is it just a more complex sales process, more content?
Like, in general, it's about more stakeholders, right? And you usually kind of come in with one person who's some sort of mid-manager, a head of sales, a sales director, a sales manager, and that person buys into your concept. And then the next stage it's not kind of selling to that person. It's about making sure you understand what kind of influencers, who do we need to involve, and to sell that white. And for us, that's just using these digital sales rooms, building out business cases, using mutual action plans, and crafting that together with our champion, and building that perfect business case that our champion can sell internally together with us. So it's co-selling with the customer, which has been pivotal for us.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, before you were using a digital sales room, it was kind of more of I don't want to say an ad hoc process, but it wasn't as structured, right?
No, I think I'm now in a new role without that process and that cushion that process gives you, and it's terrible. Like, everything takes so much more time. Your communication with customers is a lot worse, and like, it's that professionalism that's gone.
Yeah, time management becomes a lot harder. You're not able to be proactive and plan using a process and a structured set of stages.
Just like producing that content, just, hey, we need to send that proposal out with the necessary documentation, with the use cases, with the mutual action plan. And when you have that digital sales room, you have that template, you can kind of go in and you can change something on 5 slides, and you're done within half an hour. Now I'm 72 hours in, and I still haven't sent that freaking proposal, right? And that's the problem, and I miss that.
Yeah. On that topic of the different tools necessary. So, we kind of talked about the need for structure and having a process and tracking, but then also there are these different individual functions and features that need to be executed or utilized throughout that structure process. And Salesforce is fantastic in that you can see here a bit of the product landscape and all of the apps in the App Exchange. There are so many options. Salesforce is a set of all the tools you could possibly need to succeed in selling more, to speak to the first objective. But where do you start when looking at this many options? How do you build something that is agile, meets the 80% of your goal at least in the shortest amount of time, and also helps you maximize Salesforce with a plan to continue growing? What is your perspective on this, Tark? I know you've seen a handful of Salesforce instances. I'm curious what you've learned.
I think the first thing is what Remy kind of just highlighted, which is he was clear, Sales Screen was clear on what their objective was. We're struggling with enterprise as a segment, and then focusing on why are we struggling and what's our goal here. In this case, increasing the win rate. Being clear on that objective then lets you figure out what are the tools that I could use with Salesforce to achieve that objective. So the first step is being clear on your objective as a RevOps team. What are we trying to achieve? I can see in the comments someone's talking about focusing on acquiring new customers while also growing existing customers. Start with that objective and then think what's holding us back. And then you can start finding the right tools that attack that problem, whether it be digital sales rooms, maybe it's some other kind of tool, but that's step one. But then really the next step is, the App Exchange is fantastic. There's so many great products there, but it can also be a bit overwhelming. And there's also different kinds of products in the App Exchange. You want a product that's going to work with your Salesforce process, something that you can streamline with everything else you're doing. So does it work well with, Salesforce flows? Is it going to really enhance my existing process, or is it going to be a real struggle to actually incorporate it into my Salesforce processes? And I think that's one of the challenges when you're getting a tool into your Salesforce environment. It might not actually help you, get more out of your Salesforce instance and get your sales reps actually using it properly. And that can be really where you have challenges in terms of adoption later on. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think to summarize, be clear on what your objective is, and then also make sure that when you're looking for those tools, it's going to fit into how you want to work with Salesforce, not just now, but also in the long term, and how you intend to develop your processes.
Mm-hmm. That gets to the next trend from the report. 60% of revenue leaders will allocate budget to sales tools and technology. So I think that just given the world that we live in, technology is not going away. It's going to get harder and harder to eliminate tools when there are so many helpful tools out there. And in 2022, what we were seeing was people had in previous years purchased a ton of software technologies, but 2022, they reached a point where they had purchased so many, they needed to think about how they work together. So there was a lot of talk in the Salesforce ecosystem about having tools with better Salesforce integrations, having that centralized data in the CRM, keeping reps in the CRM, and building a more connected tech stack. In 2023, the topics in the ecosystem amongst customers were really around consolidation and let's make the most of what we already have purchased and simplify as much as possible. This year, I think we're going to continue seeing this consolidation trend and a lot of focus on ROI and adoption. And I'm curious, Tarek, what you have seen with customers and how they approach the Salesforce ROI and adoption challenge, given there are so many ways to use the technology and so many features within it.
I think what we saw in 2023 is only going to continue in 2024. I think people just need to be sure that the tools they're investing in are actually driving the objectives that they're setting out for, and that the ROI is clear. And I think if you're working with Salesforce, you need to have tools that not only are used in themselves, but are also helping you increase the adoption of your Salesforce instance, because it's kind of a feedback loop that you want to kind of get running. If you have tools that help you make the most of your Salesforce, that's going to actually be a win-win. So, I can say it on the Get Accept side, that's how we look at our product. It's how do we help customers get more out of their Salesforce? And if we see that loop begin to happen, it's just positive all around. And you really need to have products that have kind of a quick time to value. How much of a struggle is it going to be to set it up? Is it going to be really challenging to implement a new process? Because we know that every company has a lot of things going on. You need to focus on what the highest priority is. And it's really essential that you as a product, a tech tool that's being incorporated, aren't going to be a project that lingers and takes a long time to actually start affecting change. So I think those are kind of really the things that people need to focus on.
Yeah. And Remy, on building on Tarek's point there about the not only quick time to value, but also the maintenance aspect, what were some of the considerations you had in mind when purchasing tools in regards to maintenance? How did you evaluate whether or not the tool was hard or easy to maintain and or worth the maintenance lift or the implementation lift on that note?
Like everything has to be connected naturally. If it's not connected, and I think that's a trend we're seeing in kind of today's SaaS space, that everything is it's about consolidation, right? It's not about like the 2021, 2020 years, we just bought technology like maniacs, and it didn't matter if it's connected as long as they promised an ROI of 10% effectivity increase. In kind of today's climate where we're considerate of cost and we need to kind of see everything connect. Mm-hmm. Having something that speaks both ways is essential, right? And just having something, I know that when I update this, it's also updated in Salesforce. That's a must-have, because if it's not in Salesforce, it hasn't happened, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of data syncing using Salesforce as the data house and ensuring that you can rely on the data syncing so that you're not manually entering. Yep. That makes sense. And the next slide here is probably the most intricate, but it's a nice slide to look at when we think about the planning of the tech stack over time. Gartner is like Salesforce in that in their research, they very much consider the internal environment when looking at maximizing revenue, but they also focus a lot on buyer trends and customer trends. And they've been speaking a ton about digital sales transformation, just as Salesforce speaks about digital transformation as a whole. So I thought that this slide was nice to look at, because what you can see here is this trend over time that highlights the 5 stages of digital maturity as defined by Gartner. And so many companies are in this first stage where they're manually entering data, which is a lot of maintenance, a lot of time burden. They're using Excel sheets. Typically, they're still hand drawing signatures. And over time, more mature companies start implementing more tools. So maybe this looked like, Remy, what you're talking about, tons of tools that aren't very connected, but they're helping them, they're making a dent in the bottom line. And then as they mature, they look more at consolidation, integration, automation, and eventually reaching the 4th and 5th stages, which are considered evolutionary as Gartner defines them. And so I'm curious, Tarek, if we look at these stages, there are some tool or function examples in this graph, but what does a stage 1 or stage 2 maturity level customer look like versus the stage 4 or stage 5? And what are some of the simple features or functions that a company can implement to help advance them at a steady rate along this journey?
So, I mean, I think I'll first just start by saying, when you invest in Salesforce, you invest in a product that you're going to be continuously growing with, right? And improving over time. And, as a product manager, that's kind of the products that I get excited about, where it's not just you set it up once and you forget about it. You're always able to continue building value. So early on, in a Salesforce instance, e-signing for the first time, it feels like it's a commodity. Everyone should be doing it, but people still are at the point where they're not doing it. But a more obvious one would be, automations. Nothing's automated, or early on, a lot of manual processes, trying to manage different tools and update data manually. So that's one you see early stage companies are not addressing and are worried about addressing. Whereas later in the stages, you have companies where it's very intricate automations, different tools connected to Salesforce, working together seamlessly to really make that quote to cash process, as an example, really effective. And again, Salesforce is great at having a tool that you can grow with over time. But to take it back to your tech investments, you also want to invest in tools that help you on that journey. So a tool shouldn't be something that you just set up once and forget about it. It should meet you where your organization is, give you value right away, but also give you value over time as your organization grows. And I think that's one thing that I've seen the best RevOps teams are very clear on. Here's our stage for year 1, year 2, year 3. And a very common Salesforce scenario, moving from Excel sheets for products to, Salesforce product line items, and then maybe a few years down the road, Salesforce CPQ or CPQ Plus. And that's a very standard journey. And you can have that within Salesforce, but also with the tools that you connect to your Salesforce.
Yeah. That's a good point. It doesn't always cost money to increase adoption and continue along the digital transformation journey. It's just about having a good plan and taking micro steps in that direction.
Exactly. And I think Remy with Sales Screen, we did do that journey from going from products in an Excel sheet to using Salesforce product line items and generating the contract. Can you talk a little bit about how that was?
Yeah. So before we went through this journey with GetAccept, we had a different e-signing tool that wasn't connected to Salesforce. So you were hoping that the reps did update Salesforce. And as a sales leader, that's kind of the worst position you can be in, because you have to double check everything. And you need that trust, right? So we went from Excel pricing and kind of manual proposals over to products in Salesforce, which just simplified so much for not just for me in kind of managing the team, but also the reps and getting those proposals in front of the customers. That timeline from can you send me something to actually getting there, going through the internal processes of is this information correct, getting it in front of the customer, something they can potentially sign on, looking good, knowing that your rep hasn't given an 80% discount that they're not allowed to do because there's an approval process there and stuff like that has been huge, right? So this has definitely kind of led to increased win rates from a proposal sent stage to a closed one, because that process is better defined and there's more eyes on the price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example. The next trend is going to speak a little bit more to those stages you just mentioned, increasing win rates from the end, late stage deals. The third trend is actually related to competition, which states here 35% of revenue leaders say that competition is the leading reason they lose deals. The tricky thing about competition is they're not always going to explain why, or the customer's not always going to explain who the competition is that won or why they were better. And so I'm curious, if we hop over to this slide, we talked about late stage deals, but it's important to note that addressing competition is going to be different depending on the stage that the competition basically takes the customer. And so Remy, where have you seen competitors come into the deal cycle and affect your win rates most?
You have two different type of kind of competitive deals. You have the ones where you start the deal competitive, where it's either you're the second vendor in or there's an RFP, RFQ, RFI, right? Which is a lot tougher. And then it's kind of those deals where you basically sold them the concept and they kind of come in at the end and say, hey, we need to check a couple of vendors in addition to yours. So that's kind of the two different ways to be in competitive deals. And it's a lot better to be in the latter one, right? Because you're first in. I think kind of what's changed over the last couple of years is that 2-3 years ago, people would just buy anything, basically, if it was a solid product, because we were in these great years of high growth and high SaaS valuations, right? And now every deal is competitive. There's not one finance team that's going to approve a contract without knowing what options do we have? Is this price the best possible price point we can have? And as a sales rep, deals are won or lost in discovery, right? In kind of those first interactions, in those first meetings where we understand the problem for the customer, being able to solve that problem exactly, solve pain exactly. So having, for us, when we're in these deal stages where we're in competition early, it's all about how well is that discovery phase and how good are we at creating mutual action plans, detailing out how our product offering solves your pain exactly, how we differentiate from the competitor you're assessing, and being able to kind of document that is the way you win competitive deals, solving that problem better than anybody else. That's been it for us.
Yeah, I think that you're kind of touching on the point that addressing this challenge of losing to competitors, one must consider both internal and external factors. Sometimes it's an internal efficiency issue related to the late stage deals and taking too long to craft proposals, or the proposals have errors, etc. But sometimes it's an external consideration, like you mentioned earlier, stakeholders. Not all of the stakeholders were being contacted or mapped effectively as related to the opportunity. So I'm curious, with stakeholders specifically, what are some of the best practices that you've implemented with your sales teams to improve that stakeholder management stage?
Well, we've kind of set some, like, I think any good sales team needs some principles, right? And we've set some principles that says that you need to demo at least 3 stakeholders, or you can't move on to the next stage. So you can't get to the proposal stage if you haven't demoed 3 people. Because if you're single-threaded in this economy and this time, you're going to lose that deal, right? So a lot of kind of forcing the behaviors you want your reps to do, and forcing that through Salesforce. So if you can't get to that stage because you haven't done that, you're not going to be able to send that proposal. So I think that's, like, salespeople, we're simple human beings, right? So make it simple for us.
Yeah. Many reps struggle with just opportunity management in general because they're not structured enough or proactive, because they have so many opportunities, especially at the beginning. Their opportunity set kind of dwindles as they qualify, disqualify, win, and lose the prospects. So Tarek, from your perspective, technically, how have you seen, what tools or processes have you seen implemented that help improve the structure and the proactivity of the sales teams?
So I think at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about kind of internal processes and the customer experience. And when you look at the Salesforce opportunity stages, sometimes the challenge is this actually reflecting what is happening between the sales rep and the buyer? And if you don't really have confidence in that, that affects your forecasting. But as a sales leader, like Remy might know, it also affects him knowing, when should I jump in? When should I coach? When should I actually intervene to push this deal forward when something's happened here? So that disconnect between what's happening internally and externally is the big challenge. And an example of a tool that you can use technically, digital sales rooms, but mutual action plans, where you actually, when you have a difficult buying process, you're making an agreement with your buyers about, this is how we're going to structure this deal. And clearly, if you can't get the agreement, then you disqualify the deal and you move on, right? That's not a bad thing. It's better to finish a deal off early and move on than it is to let it linger without actually doing that proper discovery. So mutual action plans and anything that can kind of increase your confidence of what's actually happening with the buyers is a real positive.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I've also heard of not only mutual action plan, but mutual success plan, which would be used kind of on the other side of the opportunity with CS teams expanding. There was someone who had the goal of acquiring new, but also expanding existing customers. And I think reps, CSMs, or account managers, they experience the same challenge with proactively getting that customer prepared to renew or expand. So I've seen mutual action and mutual success plans, both. Anything else, Remy, that you wanted to add related to the the deal stages here?
No, not top of mind at the moment. I think Tarek really just hit it on the nail on the head there. It's about making sure that these deal stages actually align with what the reps are doing in conversations with your customers, right? And having those crystal clear exit criteria that's connected to your mutual action plan to make sure that your reps are adopting your process. Because if they're going rogue, they're not going to win a lot of deals, right? And in the end, we're talking about how can we improve win rates, for example. You need people to follow the process you've defined. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's a good one to conclude this slide. And the next slide here that I have is an example of a mutual action plan. Tarek, if you'd like to speak to it a little bit, since you brought it up.
I mean, if you're using a GetAccept digital sales room and you're sharing it with a buyer or a group of buyers, one of the things you can enable is this mutual action plan. And typically, very successful sales teams are using this, but it might just be an Excel sheet. But it's basically a commitment between a seller and a buyer about here's how we're going to go about this process. Here's what I have to do as a seller, and here's what you have to do as a buyer, understanding that process. And there's different methodologies that help this out. And what you're seeing here is with GetAccept, you can actually have that mutual action plan visible in Salesforce, and you can connect what's happening in that plan with those opportunity stages with Salesforce flows. And you can also have views for your sales leadership within Salesforce that lets you know what is the progress in that digital sales room with how it aligns with my Salesforce opportunity stage and forecast. And you'll be able to very quickly highlight where there's discrepancies or places where focus needs to be made. So it's just an example of how you can use tools to really align what's happening with the buyer with what's happening within Salesforce internally, and really bring together that internal process with the customer experience, and ideally get you to that deal close as fast as possible and as effectively as possible, I should say.
Yeah, it's really adding a lot of context to what's happening with the buyer instead of just having individual tasks or data points. It adds a lot more depth into these opportunity stages.
And it lets you have the confidence that you're following a specific sales process that's, kind of achieving what you want it to achieve. Demoing, as Remy said, demoing to 3 stakeholders could be a milestone. And if that actually happens with the buyers and they commit to, something around that, then something changes in Salesforce. And you have the confidence that what you think has been done has been done. Too often, you're relying on a sales rep to manually make that change. And maybe they don't make the change until long after that stage has actually been passed. I've heard that too many times when I've spoken to sales teams.
Yeah. This really also aligns a lot of different roles and departments within the organization too. I mean, we're considering sales enablement leaders and how they train sales reps to work. We're also looking at, of course, Salesforce admins and how they implement the process into the tech. But then also we're looking at VPs of sales who are considering performance and what is actually effective. What are the best reps doing that the average reps aren't? And how can we get more of the C and B players to increase in their sales proficiency?
Makes sense. And just to be clear, someone's kind of asking a question about this. So this mutual action plan that we're showing here is fully customizable in our product, and then you would be consuming it with our product in Salesforce. So it's fully customizable, and you're getting all of that data inside of Salesforce, and it can be used as you please at that point. So again, fully customizable, but we won't go too much more into that. I think we need to move on.
Yep. We will wrap up with Tarek, Remy. We'd love to hear, what is your number one RevOps tip or strategy?
I can go first. So as a sales leader and as a sales rep as well, right? And now as a CEO, define that process. Like, that's the only way you're going to get to your quality goals and your revenue goals, is that your process is truly defined. And then you need to make sure and force your salespeople to follow that process. So force fields in Salesforce, and set crystal clear exit criteria. So what's needed to move from this stage to that stage, and they need to check that box, or that automation happens by itself some way, right? So just force your reps to follow your process. That's the way you get to your goals.
And I think my recommendation would basically be, you want to find tools that are flexible, that work with Salesforce. And in our company, my favorite discovery question that our sales teams use is, are you happy with the adoption of Salesforce in your current, for our prospects? Are you happy with your Salesforce adoption? And the reason we ask that is that you want to have a tool that helps you on that metric, because that is a central metric for a RevOps team. Is everything in Salesforce? Remy mentioned if it's not there, it doesn't exist. So I'd say find tools that are flexible, that work for your sales process and help you get the most out of your Salesforce instance.
Mm-hmm. And I'll wrap up with one of my tips from kind of the sales reps perspective, which is when thinking about tools and processes that the sales reps have to go through, think about tools that will help them spend more time with the customer-facing activities, because it's those customer-facing engagements that actually help them build trust and loop in more stakeholders and really advance the deal towards the close. And so the tool's not helpful if it's putting more administrative burden on the rep in the long run. So that would be my tip there. And now we'll open up for questions. Thank you everyone for joining. And thanks Remy and Tarek both as well for the discussion.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that really interesting presentation, guys. Hopefully our audience now has a much better idea of how RevOps strategies can transform their sales processes. So without further ado, it's time for our Q&A. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to submit them in the comments below and we'll try to get around to as many as possible. So let's see what we've got here. Let's just remove the deck. Okay. So have you adopted any tools that have helped you track how multi-threaded your sales process is?
I can answer that question. Well, multi-threading is, in the end, it's up to the rep, right? And it's about inviting people into the process. So naturally, again, through GetAccept and digital sales rooms, you can invite as many stakeholders as possible. So when you're going to invite them into that, you're able to see not just that they've been invited, but you're actually able to see what kind of content they've consumed, where they're spending time. So next time you meet them, you can go in and say, hey, I saw you watching that integration page for 5 minutes. Like, what concerns do you have with regards to integrations? And it's eye-opening where they spend time, right? And it's so different from role to role and from deal cycle to deal cycle. You assume that they're going to spend all their time on pricing, but more often than not, that's not the problem. They're spending their time on the problem statement or the business case, not necessarily on the cost of the solution. And I think that's when you realize you've done a good job in the sales process.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Remy. And I think another thing to think about is, if you want to multi-thread, you want to empower the people you're already communicating to kind of find those people. So how do you empower a champion? If you're sending a lot of different emails with content, it's going to be harder for them to bring that together and then share it with the right stakeholder. If you're using something like a digital sales room, it's very easy to just share that link and have that new stakeholder come. And again, a key part of this is that you don't want this information to live outside of Salesforce. So of course, those stakeholders should automatically be pushed into Salesforce as a lead or a contact, so that you're keeping track of all of that in both places. But really, I think that is, using a digital sales room is a very effective way of, multi-threading. But again, it is up to the sales rep to properly do that. And with mutual action plans, you're able to kind of somewhat scale that process.
Cool. Thank you. So what do you actually define as a digital sales room?
I can give my perspective as a customer if you want. Before we implemented digital sales rooms, every time you finish a meeting, and the customer says like, I'll talk to somebody internally, blah, 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 blah. Let's meet again on Tuesday. And you want to make sure that they have something they can kind of sell internally. So what a digital sales room for me is, it's that 5-minute pitch, consuming a description of their problem, our proposed solution, and a timeline, a mutual action plan, and an evaluation plan. And that could be a 1-minute video that's highlighting that one exact thing. It could be the product video, it could be a solution proposal, a PDF, a one-pager, an analysis, and you can kind of deliver that specific content. So when your champion or coach or whatever it is going to their manager and to present this, you've kind of crafted that perfect thing that's for them there and there. And it's simple to create, it's easy to put out, and you can create multiple templates for different use cases. And then you can actually monitor and see if they're consuming it, if they're discussing. There's a chat there, you can talk to them, they can ask questions, and it's just, really helpful.
Yeah. Another word that is often used to describe a digital sales room is collaboration or collaborative. And it's, instead of the rep selling to a buyer, it's a buyer-facing portal where both the buyers and the sellers meet to exchange communication and collaborate throughout the sales process. So it's not so much one-way selling. It really brings the buyer and immerses them in the selling process in a more enjoyable or efficient manner.
Thank you. So how do you differentiate this from Slack, Elevate, or Gong deal rooms?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because those tools are very new and changing. So I can't say that I've had the most experience with the Gong Elevate or the Gong deal room, but with Slack, I think the difference is Slack is about like group chats and sharing content, often internally. It's kind of task oriented. It's like a one-time share communication. I have a question. Okay, here's the answer. Check the box. I don't think Slack is fully yet being utilized for selling. It's a lot of group chat communications, customer support threads that are happening, but not so much active buying processes where stakeholders are entering and exiting the process. It also doesn't really have an end point, whereas using digital sales rooms has a start with an objective and a clear end and a transition out of using the room.
And really the goal is to help you go from, qualified lead to deal sign. So really helping you from that entire process. How do I progress the process, share new content as the process demands or as new stakeholders join, and having that shared space can really help you there. And it's not just early in the sales process, but also late in the sales process when you need to share a proposal, get it signed. And that's really where a digital sales room can help a RevOps team kind of manage that whole sales process effectively. So that would be one differentiator with those products that were mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Okay, nice. So Ines has recently joined a company as a RevOps specialist and is struggling to reinforce the utilization of Salesforce tools for contracting with their finance team. So is there a benefit in bringing in a specialized Salesforce consultant to support implementation and customization?
I can take this question. I mean, it's a tough one. The first thing to really be clear on would be why the utilization is low, understanding what the reason behind that is. I wouldn't recommend right away going for a consultant if you're not really clear on the why and where the struggles are. So I think there needs to be a little bit more, and I obviously don't have the details, but you want to have a bit more of a clear assessment of what the challenges are. And then from there, you could make a decision of, we need to do X, Y, and Z in Salesforce, and an implementation consultant would help me achieve that. So I think being more clear on what the challenge is and what we could do about it, and then how do we actually do that, and then you decide on a consultant. But Remy, I know you've actually executed a lot of these projects. Does that sound about right? Or?
Yeah, and I think it's about just involving, it might be the finance team that's struggling, but Like, is there a sales team behind here that's impacting the problem? So getting leaders for all departments kind of throwing that challenge up in the room and trying to figure out where's the root cause, where's the root problem, and solving that first before you kind of solve the following tickets.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Great. Cool. So some questions from YouTube. So how can pricing strategy and quoting processes be improved to shorten the time to close?
Yeah, I think Tarek spoke to this one earlier when we were looking at the digital maturity slide. There are so many customers still using Excel sheets for products and prices. So, can we get these companies to clearly define what their products are, what their pricing structure is, and then can they, at the very least, put them into product line items and maximize the use of those product line items and the price books? And then if they reach a point where that isn't capturing all of what they need for their pricing strategy, and if that's not working with their contracting process that faces the customer, Salesforce has other tools and the quote object and CPQ as the company advances. But the first step is really outlining the products, the prices, the structure. How does this work with the customer facing component, which is the contract document, and then maximizing that ROI until they need to take it to the next level.
And getting the proposals in front of the customers fast, and getting and communicating and talking about pricing with the customer. So just getting that speed in time to get the price out there. And there's a difference between a proposal and a contract, right? A proposal is a lot lighter. It should be super simple to create, shouldn't require as much information to kind of get to that point. So that's important for us.
Yeah, and with the proposals, if a company has a proposal to contract process versus just like a one sign process, how do they handle negotiation? I think a lot of companies overlook what happens when the customer needs a change to be made in the document, and what does that process look like technically with Salesforce and all of the data. It becomes quite manual and cumbersome, and data is lost if there's a negotiation or a change. And so that should definitely be considered with proposals and contracts as well.
Okay. Does a digital sales room work better with lead or opportunity objects?
It really depends on what you're trying to get out of it, but I think it works great for both. So it really is a question of how early in the process are you going to be incorporating a digital sales room, and where your biggest challenges are. But sharing a digital sales room right when you have a qualified lead to get kind of the first meetings booked and do those first introductions, and then have that digital sales room connect from the lead to the opportunity when that transition happens. Is possible and a very good scenario. But I wouldn't say there's a better place. The opportunity will handle most of it though, right? So once you've got that lead and you're progressing the sales process, the majority of that process is going to be managed by the opportunity object.
But like a digital sales room should be used, it should be created the second after the first meeting is completed. Right? Because that's kind of when that's your time to influence your buyer. So not sending it when you've demoed 7 people and they've made their decision. Like you're going to use this technology to influence decision making. So make sure that it's there. You've been able to kind of type out their problem, explain the solution, connect every piece of information they need to be able to solve their challenge and for them to select you, right? So doing that as early as possible, and it depends on your Salesforce setup, I guess. But if it's like that belongs in the lead stage, well, it works well for leads as well.
And we've had customers who have success doing it after the first meeting, but also before, as kind of here's kind of some introduction materials. It's a way of gauging interest, so it's also kind of another validation of the lead's interest. Before that first meeting, and maybe knowing for the sales rep, oh, they're very interested in this.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So how do you connect what's happening with the buyer with what's happening in Salesforce?
So I think there's a lot of tools that Salesforce gives you access to do that. So if you're pushing all of your data in a digital sales room into Salesforce, using Salesforce flows is a very strong way of making sure that that whatever happens with the buyer is then reflected the way you want in the sales process. That could be changing an opportunity stage as an example. Also, if you're collecting data from a buyer, is that information that's collected automatically populating the relevant Salesforce fields, maintaining Salesforce as the source of truth and as the central place in your data. So there's quite a few ways where you can make sure what's happening with the buyer is then pushed and reflected in Salesforce. Because if you don't have that connection, the efficacy of the tool is really challenged.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, nice. I think that's all we've got time for today as we're coming up to the hour. So thank you so much to everyone for attending. We hope you've gained valuable insights into optimizing your sales cycles with RevOps strategies. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here, so feel free to connect with our panelists on LinkedIn for further discussions and insights. So I'd like to extend a massive thank you to Madison, Tarek, and Remy for sharing their expertise and insights with us today. Before we finish up, any final words, guys?
None from me. And just yeah, thank you very much. And please, as Zaina said, feel free to reach out and connect. Yeah, have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again to everyone for attending, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye.